Just checking for that light. That tape goes over it sometimes. Well, I think we've reached in the sanctuary here a critical volume to have a few more folks to jump in and study lesson with. So let's go ahead and get started with our new quarter entitled Exodus, Journey to the Promised Land. Interesting way to look at that. Exodus, you always think you're leaving, right? That's the exit, Exodus. But this author thought of it a bit different way. Yeah, sure, you're leaving, but it's about the journey and going somewhere. So, interesting thought to think about that. Thought about that as I was reading this and getting prepared and starting out for this quarter. And I thought, well, sure, whenever I get off and exit on the interstate, it's to go somewhere, to stop, to refresh, to whatever it may be that I need, refuel, whatever it might be. But the terminology is such that you're leaving the highway, so that's why it's an exit. But thinking of it maybe just slightly different here. We'll see where our quarter takes us. Let's pray, and we'll get started with our lesson. Father, we are thankful to you for this Sabbath, for the freedom we have to be here, for the celebration in our country. Recognized yesterday that here we are almost 2.5 centuries later, and I am so sure that some of the individuals, or many of the individuals we read in history, wanted to come here for the ability to worship you and to do that freely and of their own preference and volition. And throughout history, as you think about that a little bit more around this holiday, there have been so many times when we were sure, including at the beginning of starting this church, that you were going to be here soon. And here we are. And Lord, I'm thinking of that when I study this in the second book of the Bible, such a long time ago in history. And there was that desire and that belief that it would be soon. And Lord, just help us to take the assurances that are here to our lives now and know that that time is coming when this exodus will be from this planet in its state that it's in, and that our journey to be with you will be complete. We pray in your name, amen. All right, so oppression, the background and the birth of Moses. It starts out here with our memory text. The children of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry came up to God because of the bondage. So God heard their groaning. God remembered his covenant with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. God looked down upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them. Exodus 2:23 through 25. Our author throws down that the Exodus resonates with the accounts of the oppressed, the marginalized, the persecuted, the exploited, the degraded. So if you feel that way today, you can find hope, because the same God who saved the Hebrews can save you as well. Talks about injustice and trials are a part of life, but everyone can be encouraged about the stories of God's intervention in favor of his suffering people. Now, as I'm studying this lesson, I confess, that's why my wife and I were talking about this a bit yesterday, just in thinking about, where we put our hearts, where we put our minds, where we put our focus. And when we study the Bible, when we read it again, when we view it maybe from a different perspective, a different time frame, I don't know why, but I'm curious if I'm the only one. Somewhere along the line, I had the perspective that the children of Israel were in Egypt for hundreds of years. Is that just me? Was that a common thought? Did I miss something when I read the lesson? Because it looks like it was just over 100. Based on what the author laid out. And I didn't, busy week finishing up my new orientation, I didn't get my time in to see, where did I get that idea? And what is the time frame? Because I was all ready to go. Oh, God heard their cries, and he heard their cries But what was going on the other 422 years? Why were they enslaved for so long? But our author kind of lays it out in the historical background of the children of Israel. And I believe we know, but just in case, it's a nice, good recap that, how did the Israelites even get into Egypt? And maybe we see that more today if we study the geography of that part of the world. Israel and Egypt are not that far apart. In fact, when you think about it, when the whole deal went down a couple of years ago and the people in Palestine were being pushed out, one of the countries they were going to was Egypt, because it's right there. And so if you're thinking about that time, obviously transportation by foot, it makes sense that they wouldn't have traveled far. It makes sense that as Joseph is sold into slavery by his brothers, that's where they would have gone. It wouldn't have been that far away. And we know about the famine and the story behind Joseph. So this isn't a repeat of all that, but that's how they got there, yes?
And there would have been established roads.
Yes.
Even in Abraham's day.
Yep.
Down that coast, down into Egypt and up into Asia Minor.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And when you look at the map, it really isn't far. And as you say, they were out working, Joseph and his brothers, right, when he went to see them, and there were people on the roads, right? That's who they sold Joseph to. They had him in the pit, pulled him out, and said, off you go. And so again, it's not a take on Joseph and what happened to him, but it is the beginning of God's people in Egypt. And so when you look through this, and I got to thinking about this too, it is an interesting perspective. I don't know if it's a population thing, like it would have taken 300 to 400 years to amass that many Israelites. Because when you read in our lesson today, and that was another thing, maybe I just need to spend a little more time this week, get a little break, so maybe I'm going to do this. I'll get back to you. But 70 people, right? So we're talking Israel, Jacob, when the whole story where that's how they got to come and live in the land of Egypt. There were 70 people. And when I read this, I wanted the author to explore it a little more, but I didn't see it. I think that's 70 men, to be quite blunt. I know it talks about other things, and in the lesson it kind of goes to some other areas, but it seems like the accounting is always the men. So it's not just 70 people, but still that's a pretty small number to become the accounting that we see that leave Egypt. Yes?
Where do they get 70 people from? Because there's nothing in the text that says this was it.
Right.
Joseph and da-da-da, that was all the people that came in. And I would imagine that once word got out that, hey, these guys have food down here,
Yeah.
there may have been other Jews that came, right?
So I guess that's where it comes to, are there other Jews, or is Jacob the only Jew at this time? Did they go from there? And I'm with you, other believers, other people who may have, it's hard to think that they were having an influence on their neighbors, and the neighbors were in the same family, exactly. So where were they going to go? And so strangers in a strange land. It's an interesting concept. So when the author talks about this, I was reading through that, by the best calculations is kind of what they're talking about. And so to understand the time of Exodus, I'm in Monday's lesson, study the following biblical texts and kind of looking through some of those texts. And it says the first chapter covers a long period from the time of Joseph when his father Jacob with the entire family entered Egypt to Pharaoh's death decree. Some debate exists over the exact number of years. What matters is that even when his people enslaved in a foreign land, the Lord did not forget them. But I get it doesn't necessarily matter, but it does, because people are going to question this. People are going to wonder about where this comes from. That's where it was in the lesson where it talked about 70 people. And I just thought it was, from my perspective, in what we read about, it was 70 men. But how long does it take for the population to grow? Because it talks about how the Pharaoh knew Joseph. He got him through these 7 years, right? And he was second in command. So this was pretty powerful. Jacob was shown respect. They gave them the land of Goshen, as it were, gave them, right? This is where you're going to live. This is where you're going to thrive. And it was good land. I mean, you're talking about the Nile River Delta. I mean, this is a good place. And there was prospering going on. And there was a lot of growth within that community. But like you say, is it just Jacob and his family? Are there others that came? Would they have welcomed them in? I want to believe so, based on how they were told by the Lord to take people in. So, again, I don't know that answer. That's why I was wondering if others kind of helping me with the 400 years and the numbers and some of these things. Some of it was like, well, this is very different than what I remember on some level. Yes?
Yeah, I think a quick Google search here suggests that the author was using Answers in Genesis and Alpha and Omega Ministry. So there's somebody out there who's done some type of calculation.
Sure.
You have to assume like at least 6 kids per family, low death rate, high long longevity. If you make a bunch of assumptions, then within 200 to 400 years you could go from 70 people to 60. But this is all someone's theory, right? Like,
right.
I think we have to be careful to say the Bible doesn't actually say
Good point.
these numbers, right?
Yep.
This is just somebody's pet product.
Well, and it would also be interesting to think about, if they're there, to think that there would be no more migration or no more time frame where people would have come, would also be very interesting. And right, you're talking about population statistics and numbers, and once again, only using that 70, considering that would only be men. Now, I get that, but knowing how the culture worked, I mean, even Jacob himself, 4 wives?
Right.
Or 2 wives and 2 I mean, there's a lot of leaps there that we just don't know. But we do know from the historical record. That's the point I was looking at when we look at the historical background in Monday's lesson. That's why I want to kind of reconcile this, that the most plausible, and even then, isn't it? It says the most plausible. How do we not know? It doesn't say, well, here it is written down, but it says the most plausible historical background is the new ruler in Exodus 1:8, who did not know Joseph, is Amos, 1570, and to the time where Moses is adopted as a son is somewhere between 1503 and 1482. Now, this is also interesting because 1570 is that first leader who didn't know Joseph. How long did Joseph's renown last? Was it 1 generation, 2 generations, 3 generations? Our author doesn't really get into that. So maybe it is not, it's just from what the Bible is saying, from when you don't know Joseph until Moses comes along, that's just over 100 years. So if it takes 100 years to forget Moses, and then don't forget, Moses isn't bringing him out of the promised land for another 80 years. I mean, bringing him out of Egypt to go to the promised land, right? 40 years in Egypt, 40 years in Midian. It's not like the children of Israel aren't living and continuing to expand the population. So it's an interesting thought process when you think about these numbers. Yes?
We have people who were worldwide famous from the 1920s, that if you mentioned their name today, the vast majority of the world would say, who is that? And they say, oh, wasn't that the guy in movies like 1,000 years ago or whatever?
Right.
And they might have a vague idea, but these people that were world famous everywhere they went, after 100 years, people say, don't know who you are.
And the culture in Egypt too, they would make statues, they would build things for the Pharaoh, not for the second in command. And the job of the next Pharaoh was to build things for them. I'm greater than, I'm better than. That's that human nature process. So yeah, it wouldn't take long.
Potiphar would have been famous while he was alive.
Yep.
And that's it.
That's it.
But except for the story of him in the Bible, we wouldn't know who he was.
Nope. So when we look at this, it maybe wasn't that long, but is that really what's important here? I just wanted to bring that out because it is an interesting take and perspective, and this is one of the things people discuss, is our author talks about how God sees his people, he hears their cry, and he comes to relieve that, right? The afflicted. It says the oppressors afflicted them, the Israelites, the more they multiplied and grew. Exodus 1:12. That is, no matter the human machinations, God is still sovereign and will save his people, even if circumstances appear hopeless, at least from a human perspective. How does that feel to Joseph's kids, or grandkids, or great-grandkids? When did this oppression actually begin? That was the other piece that our author didn't dig into, and I didn't find initially right off the bat. It says that at some point, there was whoa, these Israelis, these Israelites are getting powerful. They could rise up and battle against us. It wasn't like for the whole time, whether it was 100 or 200 years, that they were enemies, or this was a problem, but it got to be a problem, yes.
There's absolutely nothing new under the sun.
Right.
Because you look at societies now, and the Jews have their own culture. So what happens when you have a country, and you have another group of people come in, and suddenly their numbers start rising up, but they're not assimilating? The people who are already living there get very nervous, and they're like, oh, you're taking over our country. And so we see this all the time. It's happened all throughout history. I'm sure this is a very similar story where at some point the numbers got to the point where the Egyptians looked around and said, wait a minute, who's going to be in charge here?
Yes. Well, and think about that, right? So Joseph's a good guy.
Yeah.
Does that mean everybody who came? Well, wait a minute. Who are these people who this is his brothers who sold him into slavery, right? We have this, sometimes this vision of wonderful people who are just worshiping God and are only going to be positive and loving to anyone and everyone they meet. Don't think that's what the Bible says. And like you say, they come to Egypt, and it's like, oh yeah, you're from a different. Well, yeah, you're Joseph's family, but you go live over there, and yeah, you'll enjoy it. It'll be good. And probably thinking maybe when this famine's over, they'll go back home. You know, it's not that far. It wasn't that far for them to get here. It won't be far to go back home. But they stuck around. That was my question. Why did they stick around? Our author doesn't dig into it, but why did the children of Israel stay in Egypt? Famine lasted 7 years, right? That's what the Bible told us. Crops started to grow again. But did other people move into Israel right away? Or to that part of the world?
Why don't any of us move?
There you go.
It's
Nothing
easier
changes
to
under the
stay.
sun.
Unless things get bad enough, people tend to just stay where they're living, right?
But these are God's chosen people. Why wouldn't they go back to the land God gave them? We know they didn't forget of what they were raised with, right? Yes?
And the Bible's not clear on this, so I don't know unless you're aware of some texts. Maybe God was trying to speak to the people for a while and tell them, you need
Time
to
to go.
go. And maybe they weren't listening, and so maybe it had to come to this to get them to actually do what God was telling them to do. None of that is,
No.
that I know.
No, I've never seen anything like that. And that's the point. It doesn't seem to be, I mean, I don't remember reading anything in the spirit of prophecy. I don't read anywhere where, oh, they just got comfortable and hung out. I think that was definitely part of it during the time. Well, famine or Egypt and the land of, food. Where would you be comfortable at that point? But once it's over, what happens? Yes?
I can only remember as Joseph dies, even as Jacob dies, they gave a promise to say, the Lord will visit you.
Yes.
And when he does, take my bones with you.
Yes. Yes.
So that's all that comes. Probably they were waiting for God himself to tell them it's time to go.
Okay.
That's how I'm connecting, because Joseph, he followed God all his life. Even Jacob was sensitive to the Spirit. Probably as he was about to die, he could have told them, guys, let's get ready to go back home. Do this. You would have given some instructions to say, as you see this sign or that sign, please go back home. But the only counsel they gave Joseph and Jacob was, the Lord will visit you. And when he will visit you, take my bones with you.
Interesting. Thank you for reminding me of that. No, I'm with you because I thought about that studying this week. They kept the bones and they took them back. Remember, the Exodus talks about how they carried the bones to be buried. Yeah. So they knew there was going to be a return, but that was my question. Why did they go? And I was thinking about that this week. Like you said, Chad, why don't we move somewhere? Why don't we go somewhere? Well, sorry, I'm talking to you. You've left a different continent. You did. What? How does this work? God calls. There's a problem that you need to escape from. There's lots of reasons why people move, but they don't just move because, in general, because the majority doesn't have the capacity to move. It's like that takes a lot, and unless there's a real purpose, and again with the history. And remember, there's no Bible here. That's the other thing to think about. This is oral history. This is being repeated, and it's repeated well. It's sung in songs. We know how this works. But it's kind of like, we're good for now. This is where God brought us. Let's not forget that. How did they end up in Egypt? Because they felt like going? Or because God brought them there? Well, if you're a believing people like that, are you just going to say, okay, thanks God, that was good, see ya? Or are you going to maybe wait till he tells you where to go next? One way or the other. Through a disaster, through a prophet, through the next leader, who knows? Yes?
You know, right now, we've been dealing with the Kuwait Russia war.
Yeah.
And those people coming out of there, it's hard to get a country to accept you.
True.
And then we've been dealing with the Mexico border with all South America trying to move up to the U.S., 1 million at a time or so. And it's hard to get the people to accept you again. So to think that you're just going to up and move out of Egypt, who's going to accept us and not just kill us off?
Yeah.
You know, it's not easy just to say, we got to get out of here. You can understand you got to go. Then you're going to say, you got to rationalize, where can we go and be safe? Unless the Lord does the moving.
Good point. Well, and I asked the question, who is in the land of Israel once they went to Egypt? Well, we know, right? Because when they went to go back, they found out who was in the land of Israel, and they were probably on this road the pastor was talking about, journeys and people giving messages, because Egypt is a big place of commerce, and it's, you know, right near the sea, and it's like, oh man, those Philistines up there, and the Ammonites, and the this, and the that, and the other, and it's like, we got it good. What, you know, why go anywhere, Ted?
I was going to read the text of Pharaoh. They recorded the language that Pharaoh used. He said to his people, behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. So that was the concern, is that they will overwhelm us. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so that's where the question, I think that's where they come up with the idea of the number of Israelites, is that there are people who think they know the number of Egyptians, right?
Right.
So then it becomes, well, you know, you got to have a big enough force so that the Egyptians would be worried. I don't know it's as large as we think, though, or the time frame, because you get worried before this population that you're potentially going to be at war with is equal to you. You get worried when they get to a point where they could cause some problems. So it's interesting, like we talk about, we don't know the exactness behind this. But yeah, I think what you described is perfect. I thank you for that. It's just, they've come here. God has brought them here. They believed in moving when God called them. Abraham, right? This is great grandpa, right? Jacob's grandpa is Abraham. So this is great-grandpa to Joseph. I mean, that's not that far down the road, is it? And when they're thinking about this, and well, God called Abraham, Father Abraham out. And then he called, Jacob, and he went to be with his family and brought him back to face his brother Esau. This is what they're living with. So this is where God brought us. It works. We're being treated well. There's plenty here. What's the problem? And so they hung around. It makes sense. And then again, with the absence of what's going on up where the land of milk and honey, right, where they used to live, others have moved in. It's not like they went back with their deed and said, look, I bought this land, I own this land, get out of my land. That's not how it works. You literally had to fight for your land. And these were people, and this is why I wanted to bring this up. To me, in this lesson, it meant so much. To me, this speaks to what we're facing, right? We're here in this land, and how comfortable are we? Right? And I'm not talking about USA per se, but on this earth, it's not so bad. It's challenging, it's a struggle, but it's not so bad. How comfortable are we? How much are we? How much do we seek for next? Yes?
I think the reason why we can make that statement is because we have short lifespans. But if you look throughout history and you look at any people living in any area, at some point life will be great, and then the next army or the next group decides that your land is great and they're going to take it over, and they roll through, and now it's all different, right? So I don't know if I really agree with that statement. I think we're in a relatively peaceful time in the U.S.
Yes.
But even worldwide, I mean, just look, countries are getting invaded. People thought they were living a normal life, and they have rockets coming down on them, right? So it's kind of more normal than not that there's wars and countries being taken over.
Yes, but I guess what I'm speaking to is where we are here. Are we kind of like, I'm thinking in the concept of the spiritual Israel, are we kind of in that same setting where we've lost that edge? We're not worried about war taking over. We're seeing political fights now, and we don't like it. Well, of course we don't like it, because we want, happy-go-lucky, everything's fine. And it's not. You're right, Chad. I think what we're experiencing or seeing in our political dynamic, go to most other places in the world, and this is tame. They're just saying dumb things on TV and doing things that make people upset, but they're not actively out there in war zones, which you see in so many other places. I guess what I'm saying here is, what is the lesson to us when we think in that term? Are we the children of Israel? Are we really seeing ourselves living in a foreign land? This earth is not our home. And are we getting comfortable? Are we like, it's not so bad? And at what point do we not even realize when we're becoming enslaved? And that's where I'm going. When did the children of Israel get enslaved? We're not told, right? But I get a sense in reading this week's lesson that it wasn't for a very long time. You think, they were in Egypt for 400 years. Even if it was 400 years, it wasn't 400 years of slavery. Those first time when Joseph is second in command, and soon thereafter, there's nowhere that we read in the Bible or even in history that says they were slaves the whole time. If they're living a good life and they're having everything they need and there's not famine and there's no wars and the Egyptians are doing their thing, they're a power, they're benefiting from living next door to that. And then that doesn't mean they're enslaved. In fact, life is pretty good. Until, like you read earlier, Chad, when the Pharaoh saw and said, whoa, this could be trouble. Because that is the nature of humanity, right? We get enough people, we like this land, let's go in and take it. And if we can convince these people to be our allies, we're going to do it. And then these are people that are not Egyptian, they don't worship their gods, they're very, very different. It wouldn't be hard to say, if you're a different, maybe from the land that they used to come from, let's go take Egypt. I could see that paranoia setting in to the Pharaoh, yes.
I had to look this quote up because I forgot. It's actually from Hemingway. But you know, they asked someone how they went bankrupt, and he says gradually, then suddenly. And I think that's true of a lot of things in life. That, you know, how did the Egyptians become slaves? I'm sure it was a series of small, little, tiny things that they didn't notice, and then suddenly they couldn't leave. Because Pharaoh says, what is Pharaoh worried about? Pharaoh is worried about that they're going to rise up and then they leave.
Yep.
So even at that point, they were already clearly using the Israelites for something that
Sure.
they wouldn't want to be doing, right?
Yep.
It's quasi-slavery, menial tasks, who knows?
Price to pay for living here.
Yep.
We don't know. We know you're not Egyptian, and yeah, etc. Interesting that your statement there kind of ties up with what she said, afraid that they were going to leave.
Yep.
Why would they even think that? Oh, that's right. History, it kind of validates it. Well, they've got the bones in their forehead. Come on, we know that they know each other. It's not like we're trying to discover it, but if you're living at that time in that land, these are not mysteries if you're living there. Pharaoh knows, yeah, they could leave, then what? Is it any different? And I bring this up not to be, you know, provocative when I say that. Is that any different as to why we had a civil war in this country? I mean, if you look at the Civil War and you look at what this was about, why didn't the South want slavery to end? I mean, it was an economic war, right?
So why? I think the theory that I've heard is that it was a question of how the economy was structured, right?
Exactly.
And the Southern economy needed brute force labor
Yes.
in nasty climate that owners didn't want to work in.
Exactly.
And the North didn't really work that way.
Nope, it sure did not. And so is that so different than what we read about here in Egypt with the children of Israel? Like you said, there's labor that needed to be done for whatever reason. These were those healthy, strong farmers that worked the land. Hello, that just continues, doesn't it? Think about the history of Israel. When were they warriors? Do you read that anywhere? I mean, God raised up his army, but it was 300 men with Gideon. It wasn't like all of a sudden they're just war-like state that were made the children of Israel. These are people that lived with and communed with the Lord. This was their calling. They worked the land. This is not who they were. They wanted to do that. This is what it was like in the Garden of Eden. It was to work the land. Not to the point of toil, but that's what it was about. It doesn't, like you said, nothing's new under the sun. It makes a ton of sense that the Egyptians are saying, don't want to lose this workforce. It's kind of the same battle we're having today, right? Think about what we're seeing. Oh, we don't want immigration, but we don't want to go do the menial tasks in the country. So what do? Nothing new. Nothing new. So how does God work with this? Well, it's interesting. In our lesson, because we're running out of time quickly, it talks about in Tuesday's lesson about the Hebrew midwives. It's interesting how every person who writes a lesson comes up with a different perspective, and this is one of those for me anyway. It says, what key role did the midwives play, and why are they remembered in history? I smiled when I read this because I was like, remembered in history. I gotta be blunt. I've read through Exodus and everything else, but I never paid much attention here. So maybe it's finally coming to my memory of history, as they say. But what was the key deal to the midwives? So the midwives are the ones delivering the babies, right? So they represent how God delivers us. And they represent, if they had done and followed everything the Egyptians had said, right? Then Moses would not have been there. I mean, there were so many others who were killed, and when they got thrown in, but if the midwives had done their part and killed them at birth, it wouldn't have had to happen if they'd have followed through that, showing the deliverance. And that's the idea behind the midwives. Chad?
Yeah, I guess that's interesting that was the take from that text, because I actually had the complete opposite, or my mind just went a completely different way, and quite often people are like, oh, how could God go and kill the firstborn of the Egyptians, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh my goodness, look at what Pharaoh was trying to do, which is kill all the, I mean, and even way before.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. He was trying to do that as a programmatic genocide.
100%.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, and the interesting part is, it wasn't the Egyptians doing it. The goal was to have the Israelites kill their own children, the midwives. Get to the key linchpin and say, kill those boys. Again, nothing new under the sun. What happened in China not long ago with your one child, right? I mean, what man does to man is awful. It is unbelievable what happens. And then when they couldn't get the midwives to do the dirty work, as they say, that's when he put out the decree to kill all those that got missed, that the midwives didn't follow the rules that they had laid out.
But the other really cool thing about that is that you see sometimes how, you know, we always ask for, or say, God, provide us wisdom. And the midwives just didn't openly defy the Pharaoh, because, you know what would happen then.
Oh, yeah.
They said something that was very wise, which was, oh, they're just kind of, the baby's already out.
Yep. They're tough. Those tough Israelites, right?
Yeah.
And it's also an interesting thing when you think about that. Doesn't that also foster the belief that these Israelis are a little scary? It's kind of a self-fulfilling deal. Oh, you can't even kill them when they're babies? Well, I don't want them to get big. That's going to be even harder. It's interesting how sometimes this flows out. And then we know the lesson about how Moses is born, God's providence, having him put in the basket, and even the name Moses is interesting. When this Egyptian princess, remember the sister of the Pharaoh, adopts Moses as her son, the name given Moses is a reflection of when you, and I thought about this, son of Ak, it's an Egyptian name, and yet it says in the Hebrew is Moshe, which means drawn out. His life was miraculously spared when he was drawn out of the river. It's interesting how the name means something very different in the two languages. But finding the meaning behind it and how it works. So many times you want to change a name, right? How many times Daniel and his three friends got their name changed? Jacob got his name changed. In this setting, again, thinking about prophecy that we just came out of, the name Moses, yeah, it works for the Egyptians, but guess what? It also works for Israel. It's one God. And I'm not calling Moses a God, but the name is the name, right? It signifies the same person. There doesn't have to be a change here. And it says we only know a few things about his early life, but I find that very interesting as well. We just kind of gloss over it. He lived for 40 years in Egypt. The first 12 with his family, and then once that age of 12 came and he was taken back to the palace, think about the parallels with Jesus. That age when he was in the temple, talking to the rabbis, the Pharisees. There's that first solid learning that occurs to that age where you learn about God, where you're supposed to be out of nature, where you're supposed to be truly communing with him. And then you can go get some of the ways of the earth, whatever it is, your trade, your knowledge. If it's a knowledge-based activity you're going to engage in. And Moses has gotten that first 12, and now for 28 years is in Egypt, learning everything to potentially take over. It's a powerful statement in my mind as to how God always has his eyes on us. And I would not call Moses persecuted, not in the physical sense, living the way he was living in the palace, but he also wasn't home, right? He would see what was going on. Those first 12 years he lived, and he saw those people being beaten. And then he's in a position to do something about it, it upsets him. Yes?
Yeah, but I think this, you're talking about him killing the
Yes,
Egyptian, right?
yes.
So I do think this reminds me of the text of Romans where God, or Paul's right now that God says everyone knows the law and it's written in your heart. And well, Moses clearly knew that what he was doing was wrong.
Yes.
Because he says he looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian. So he knew what he was doing was wrong. He just wanted to do it.
Anger, right?
Or whatever.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
It is an interesting take when we think about this, and it's not the last time Moses strikes something. As we continue on, I'm sure we'll see about that down the road when he strikes a rock, which of course, as we know, in what we just studied the last quarter, represents Christ and his church. So it's an interesting take on this, but it's unfortunate we don't know more, or maybe it's not necessary. Because we can relate. We can relate to being in a situation where frustration can come in, where there's, even when you quote unquote have it all, as Moses would have had, it was empty. Something was still off, and he knew it. And what does he do with it? Yes.
Well, I mean, what does God say? Revenge is mine.
Yep.
And I think this is a classic example of, like, even though his people were being persecuted and he saw all this injustice and wrong, and I'm sure there were 1,000 paybacks due to the Egyptians, and yes, it's wrong to beat someone else. Still, you're not supposed to take things into your own hands.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I appreciate what the author said, which was very curious how this story would have turned out if Moses hadn't given in to that temptation.
It is interesting, isn't it? And whatever feelings had come into his heart were now there. Whether he actually killed at that point or not. And again, that's where it becomes speculation. But think about what Pastor said earlier we were talking about. Do you think Moses was aware of Joseph? So this is another interesting piece. Again, thinking about it. Don't know, not told in the scriptures. But if he's being schooled now in Egypt, when we talk about how this new Pharaoh didn't know Joseph, it wasn't that they didn't know of Joseph. As we read and as we understand what happened in those times, there was very good historical accounts. I would definitely say that when he's living with his birth mother in the land of Goshen, he probably heard all about Father Abraham and the ancestry. And then when he's in Egypt, if he's any kind of a human being with curiosity, he's going to look this up. He's going to talk to the people who are the historians and hear the stories and find out about this and go, huh, that's my ancestor. And yet God did this. You got to wonder, because, and we'll keep studying this quarter, so we'll close here, but something did tip. And it took a long time for him to get through that, the next 40 years in fact, before he was ready to do God's will at God's time. It's going to be interesting to see this. Yes?
The other thing I think is important to point out is that sometimes you think, oh, I'm getting old, and I mean, God clearly, Abraham, all these characters in the Bible, used them later in their life.
Yes.
Not necessarily the 20-year-olds. I mean, he did that as well.
Yep.
But then also the other people near the end of their life, but still he was able to use them.
Yeah. And it's kind of what we talk about where, it's his timing, it's his plan. He knows the beginning from the end, and that's where this trust has to come in. And that's why, like you say, even though we have relatively short lives now, when we think about it, we don't need to be lulled either. Keeping him right at the forefront is the most important thing ever. Let's pray. Father, we are thankful to you that you have always had a plan from the very beginning. Before you made this earth, Lord, you knew. You knew what could happen. You knew based on the challenge that had been placed that it would have to be resolved. And it would have to be resolved in such a way that it would never be questioned again. And Lord, we look back and we try to understand it, and we try to rationalize it, and we try to find explanations for it. And that's our curious minds. And even now, Lord, I believe that you knew there would be this time where our knowledge would be in this manner, at our fingertips, literally. And you have prepared a path for us to still be hungry for you, to seek you, to find you, Lord, because it's not hard. You're right there. You're knocking on our hearts. We always say we're seeking you, Lord, but we know you're seeking us. Help us to keep that ever present and to learn from Moses, to learn from history, to learn about this Exodus story that you have recorded, that is part of this whole beginning, as it were, of this great controversy from our perspective as we're approaching a time where we see it drawing to a close. We just pray that you'll be close to us as we study this quarter, be with us as we study, that our strength will be and faith will be faithful.